All right, looks like we're live now, so we better behave ourselves, okay? All right. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Okay, I'm going to kind of rehash what we did the other day, but just kind of go into a little more details. I'm very, very thankful to have my friend and colleague, Dr. Todd Watts, join us today.
Good to be here.
So, as we kind of pointed out last time, one of the things I do want to emphasize and point out to some of our listeners out there is this parasite problem we have in America. And I've reviewed European journals. I've looked over some of the literature that the Europeans are well versed with, and they actually are laughing at the Western states, calling it calling parasites. And this is actually the title of one of their articles. One of the most undiagnosed and missed problems in the West. So, how overlooked are these things today in our country?
Well, I think a lot of infections overlooked, and parasites specifically, because they're so hard to really see in the current testing. So the testing just doesn't pick them up for the most part, unless you have a case of diarrhea where you have a protozoan in there that's causing all kinds of problems. But you typically don't test very rarely for worms or flukes or tapeworm. There's a lot of parasites that are in lungs, that are in the pancreas, the liver, the kidneys, different areas in the body. So these things aren't jumping out and saying, here I am, test, and here I'm positive. And so since we live in a first world country in the United States, they magically don't exist where, I think we have people from Mexico here, maybe Central America and South America, and I think Asia, and maybe Africa too. And when they live in those places, they all have parasites, and you can't drink the water or eat the lettuce or whatever it may be. But when they cross into the United States, they magically disappear out of these people. But the fact is, it comes back to, our dogs, cats have them. If you have cattle, sheep, if you have horses, they all have them. I know people that treat their horses every 2 months, the show horses, deworming them. And if you go to Petco and PetSmart, what happens? There's a whole row of dewormers for cats and dogs, a whole row. That is over-the-counter medication that we should be able to get the same sort of thing, right, in a human form in Walgreens that cost exorbitant amounts of money in the United States, but you go to Mexico, that same product is so much cheaper, or you get the same exact product that we give cats and dogs and horses and cattle and everything else, and it's super cheap, but then costs up to 100 times more, or 800, or not 100 times more, 1,000 times more, at times.
Yeah. I think we had a problem live streaming, so Tiffany's in here and she's going to see if she can put us back on there. Our original interview that we did didn't quite have the coverage that I was hoping for, so that's kind of what we're doing this again for.
Okay, so you're recording still, where last time the recording button went off.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we're still recording, but I don't know why it's doing that. Maybe it doesn't want people to know about this, just like if we talked about measles vaccine, we'd get kicked off real quick.
I have good people around me. So anyway, we're streaming now live.
We are.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
So we kind of talked about this a little bit. How overlooked are parasites today in people? We talked about they're definitely recognized in our animal world, in the pet stores. Veterinarians get this. Pediatricians don't. I had some patients a few months ago ask a cardiologist, look, one of our functional medicine doctors is talking about parasites. And they flat out asked a cardiologist, and he was like, nope, they're not here. So how overlooked are they? Certainly by conventional medicine, but also by functional medicine doctors. What's your input on that?
I say that, well, no, the truth is they are overlooked. I mean, you are correct. They're overlooked by both. Of course, in Western medicine, it's not something they study anymore. They disappeared and magically aren't here in the United States. And so the functional medicine world, because there isn't a test that's a very good, valid test, there's all kinds of different stool sample tests and some PCR testing, but none of it's really good, and they're not testing for all the different parasites, because there's thousands of parasites, but you're only testing for maybe 50 kinds. So I would say that in my experience as a functional medicine practitioner and as, dealing with chronic illness with many people, that I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I was down the road of Lyme disease, babesia, chronic viral infections with Epstein-Barr, heavy metals. I mean, I had all these things. I'd never heard about parasites. And then I had a doctor that said, look, because I had been treating those other issues for 4 or 5 years without making the progress that I needed to make, I made 30% progress. Once a doctor actually muscle tested me for parasites and said, this is what you need to address, my health went to about 80, 90% better than where I was before. So it plays a major role in it. And now as a clinician and working with it and seeing thousands of people change their lives and developing products to help in that realm, it is a major breakthrough on chronic illness on Lyme disease. And then you start studying and researching, and there's tons of stuff out there on PubMed, and you realize like, wow, it really affects the immune system significantly, like the Th2 pathway, which then, creates this whole chronic viral infection issue, right? Causes viral replication. It suppresses the immune system from addressing that. So then Th1 suppressed, and we have Lyme and we have, the viral infections that are, everybody's testing positive. So they're positive on that, but we can't get them better because we're not addressing the parasite part, which is causing these, causing the viral replication in the first place. So it's just something we have to use common sense. We have to look at research, and we have to tie in. And Hulda Clark, right? She's the founder of a lot of this parasite stuff back in the 70s and 80s. She wrote a book, and she ties in a lot of the symptoms with specific parasites. Now, I came to a lot of this on my own before I even heard about Hulda Clark or read her books, but she just helped me validate what I was learning and help me get to a higher level. And then I studied a bunch of other doctors as well, and then just looked at research and realizing, man, almost any symptom you have can be related to parasites. So you can't rule it out, and you just have to use common sense, case history, and you have to look at, okay, what are those symptoms, and tie symptoms in with parasites, because your test probably is going to come back negative.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and again, overlooked so many times, especially when this, I want to say it's almost groundbreaking discoveries that they're starting to really look at are these co-infections. The parasites actually harbor other viral components and other, maybe other bacteria, stuff like that. How common are these co-infections found together?
Dr. Alan McDonald, he's a medical doctor, and he's a pathologist, and he's a lead, I think one of the world's leading researchers on neurological disease like Alzheimer's and MS. And in his research on, the last one he did was on MS in 2016. And in his study, when they evaluated the tissues of these people with MS that passed on, 100% of the people tissues they evaluated had both nematodes and Lyme in it. So in the Alzheimer's study, they didn't look at the nematodes, but they looked at Lyme, and Lyme was in, I think, 70% of those that had Alzheimer's. Now, I think mold can play an issue. I think that heavy metals can play an issue, but all these infections can definitely drive some of these neurological diseases that we're seeing epidemically today.
What do you think is the starting piece to this? Do you think it's a digestive problem that people are just too mineral deficient today? They don't have the B vitamins, they don't have the zinc, have adequate stomach acid, and ultimately we're seeing more and more people get these stealth infections. Do you think that's a big player in why we're having this so common now?
I don't know that it's any more common than before. I think we always had the issues. I just believe that there's a lot more issues in our health due to all the toxins we're exposed to today. So an example of the first line of defense in our body is our stomach acid. And if that's not flowing the way it needs to, then that is going to allow more of these things to take hold. If we have an alkaline, quote, alkaline stomach, right, not high enough acid, then these bacteria, fungus, mold, parasites are going to take more hold into what happens. People that have Non-stomach acid will have more tendency towards H. pylori and other bacteria as well. But the key part then is looking at what's driving this imbalance, what's driving these problems, what's destroying the tissue. And that's where you get into the herbicides and pesticides, all these chemicals we're exposed to on a daily basis. I mean, there's 80,000 new chemicals since the 60s. The use of glyphosate, Roundup, skyrocketed in the 90s, just in the same fashion and curve that hospitalizations for Crohn's disease went up. There's huge correlations with these chemicals and people's health and what's happening today in the world. And, there's exposure to heavy metals, lead in, we talk about Flint, Michigan, and there's lead in the water. There's 1,100 other cities in the United States that have just the same amount or more lead in their water. We're not talking about that. And so it's just a toxic world today. We're just exposed to more things. So then our bacteria in our gut's not good. It's not, the bacteria is designed to help make B vitamins and make other vitamins and nutrients our body needs. So now we're deficient in nutrients because the good bacteria is killed off by this antibiotic of a pesticide or herbicide, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really an antibiotic and a chelator. So then it's sucking our minerals out as well. So now we're deficient and we're killing the good bacteria, the good microbiome that's helping produce a lot of the nutrients we need. So you wonder why we have depression and anxiety and all these other problems at really epidemic levels that we've never seen before, even going into little kids.
Yeah. In 1945, 4% of the entire population of the United States had chronic illness. 4%. 2015, 46% of children alone now have chronic illness. And I think you've really hit the high points. The mid-90s, I think, is when this epidemic just took off. It was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. We've been eating processed food and all these things for many years. And you can watch, any of the 80s shows I've watched with my children over the last, several months. We watched Harry and the Hendersons, for instance. We watched Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox. And these were movies from the 80s. And what you can't help but notice is all these people look healthy, strong, and they all don't have a real healthy, they all have a healthy body weight. So that was in the 80s. And hardly... most people, you might find one or two, especially if somebody has a really poor diet, but you might find one or two people that have maybe a candida problem in the 80s. And now when the mid-90s hit and our agricultural changes have occurred where they allowed, now they started using the Roundup in ridiculous amounts, 300 million pounds a year in the mid-90s. That's a pound, per person in America. And now it's in 75% of our rain, 75% of our wind. And it's exactly right. It doesn't even have patents on it for a weed killer. It's patented as an antimicrobial, an antibiotic. And again, it's water soluble. So the dispersion mechanism is completely horrific. It's everywhere. And it's wiping out our microbes and knocking out our mineral content. And we're just getting overtaken by nature's scavengers, if you will. And, some of these symptoms we're seeing in people today, children, allergies, out the wazoo. One of the first things I give them is a zinc test. And they always say, can I have a little more water? And I look right at the parents and I go, that's why he's here. He has no zinc. He has no, and you need zinc, you need thiamine, and you need chlorides to make hydrochloric acid. And if you don't have any zinc in the children, they're just going to be overridden with allergies. And they're, again, not going to be able to fight off the simple stealth infections. And that kind of what you're seeing in practice. We're so mineral deficient, our bodies can't even fight these things off anymore.
Yes, and the thing to look at is even deeper issue of our foods. They talk about our foods are lacking the minerals. And why is that? Because the microbials, the bacteria in the soils, right, help to break down the minerals in the soils. So then we have a plant-derived mineral, not a soil-based mineral, which is in organic form. So the bacteria play a major role in upregulating or taking the minerals from the soils into the plants, which then we eat the plants and get the good minerals. So if we're spraying all these plants in the soils with this antibiotic and chelator, then we're removing both the minerals by chelation and we're killing the bacteria, which is uptaking the minerals into the plant. So our foods are becoming less nutritious. So what do we need to do with that? We need to look at growing our own foods or getting it from better sources and trying to get, plant derived based minerals into our diets.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It all starts in the soil where the bacteria are there. And again, microbiome, and the studies I've done on the microbiome show that, we're one human, 22,000 genes, and that's pretty insignificant as far as our genetic makeup. A rice plant has 60,000 genes, and we have 22,000. A flea has 30,000 genes. And then you go to the microbiome and how important the contributing factors are. It's 40,000 species of bacteria, roughly, 2 million genes. Now we should have that many bacteria, but we're all walking around with a fraction of that because of this heavily exposure to these Roundup and these antibiotics, and I mean even the chemicals on the golf course and chemicals in our shampoo and everything else. They will do that too. Then there's 300,000 species, and again, this is all new ground. This is this is like 2019 stuff. They're starting to kind of unwind. 300,000 species of parasites, 2 trillion genes, and 5 million species of fungi with 125 trillion genes. So we're mostly microbial factors, and these things all kind of keep each other in balance. And I think with our bacteria getting wiped out, and it's very, very common still to this day, unfortunately, to see children getting prescribed antibiotics too. So that doesn't help. Whenever you wipe out that section of the bacteria, everything else just kind of goes unchecked. So how we've kind of mentioned this before, but now since we're live streaming it, I'd like us to kind of re-go over this. Parasite symptoms are usually a little different in adults versus children, correct?
Yes, there is some variation with that.
So with children, what are the more common symptoms that you see that maybe should cue parents in to make them think that this is a possible parasite problem?
There's a variety, one of which is eczema or skin issues. Another one is, I would say, another one could be ADD, ADHD. Also, stomach pain, stomach issues, digestive issues, constipation, anxiety and depression.
Grinding teeth,
itchy butt, behavioral issues, anger issues.
So anger issues. What kind of correlation, as an expert in this microbial stuff, what kind of correlations are these behavior issues? What's causing these, would you say, that is the parasite culprit? How do parasites cause behavior changes in people?
There's a couple of things. One is they secrete toxins. Those toxins, when they overburden our body, inhibit reactions from happening or just cause toxicity, which just overburdens our immune system and our toxic system, which allows other things to take over. The other thing is this: there's several studies done on a variety of parasites. One, I'll list a couple: Schistosoma mansoni, as well as Toxoplasma gondii, which really are hookworms, and then toxo is very common in pork, and the other thing is it's common in Cajun kitty litter. So those actually inhibit the GAD67 enzyme, which converts glutamate to GABA. So then they don't have the GABA inhibitor. So there's a study that was done on Toxoplasma gondii, and it said that it makes men more aggressive and women tend to cheat more. And I laughed because I presented this at a medical conference, all these medical doctors and researchers, and I pulled this article up, and it creates a thing where people are more apt to take more risk and be more aggressive and a little bit more angry at times. So part of that could be the fact that it's affecting neurotransmitter function and causing the behavioral problems. And I've seen kids with major behavioral issues in school and at home completely change by cleaning up their guts and clearing parasites and yeast.
Yeah. So major. That's pretty phenomenal. Aggression and maybe tend to cheat more. I mean, and I could probably see that, because if you're not able to get adequate GABA produced, I mean, that's kind of your break for your brain activity. If your brain just can't turn off, you're going to be looking for any kind of thrill you can get. Chances are you probably are low in dopamine, so your reward system is malfunctioning. So what are you going to do? You're going to look for anything that's going to give you some kind of high, maybe risky behavior, maybe even intoxicating yourself even more, things like that. So interesting correlation. I mean, that's really...
And that's just some medical studies I found on PubMed and in research. I thought was really, there's several studies that confirmed that. So I really thought it was a fun factor, but really good to know it. And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because I would say probably, people that have congested livers more likely have more aggressive tendencies. Diabetics, drunks, are usually more angry. And if you are, unable to clear ammonia and acetaldehydes and things like that, that can essentially have like an ethanol type effect on your liver. And it totally makes sense why you could see these striking behavioral changes in people that are overridden with this. And again, what are they going to do? They're going to throw them some kind of tranquilizer or ADHD medication, which is essentially adrenaline, to give them a momentary focus, when their body's already, fight or flight to the max. So, and as functional medicine doctors, and I don't even really like that term very much. I don't even really like that term, because there's so many people out there that are using that title, but are not getting to the root cause of these people's problems, emotional problems, stealth infections that get overlooked because, again, maybe the doctor runs a test, maybe he doesn't. I've seen some stool samples from Mayo Clinic come in, and they've looked for like 30 parasites, and, National Geographic hasn't stated publicly that there's actually more species of parasites on planet Earth than there are people. And there's probably many more than we even know of, mutated versions and stuff like that. To think that you're going to pick it up with a small, insurance covered stool sample is pretty sad. So parasites play a big role in anemia in people, children particularly.
Yes.
What's the mechanism behind that? How's that work?
Well, part of it could just be the blood and going through how someone latch on and then suck through. And other ones, there's parasites that are small enough to be in our blood cells that destroy the blood cells as well. Those are called protozoans. So the protozoans, is a variety of those that can cause that problem. And the other issue, a lot of kids, especially girls, have constipation issues as well. And they secrete an enzyme that inhibits the peristalsis of the bowels from moving, so that they can actually break the protein down and eat the protein. And that's why stomach acid in our enzyme production needs to be very important. So we're getting the nutrition, not them. But their goal is to alkalize the stomach, right? Or to bring that pH to a lower value, which means it's more alkaline than acid. A higher value is more acidic. So a pH of 1 is a much higher value than a pH of 14, for example. And so the other thing that correlates with that is our bile flow. So if we have a congested liver, the bile and also pancreatic juices, so the bicarbonate from the pancreatic juices helps to neutralize the acid from the stomach. If those aren't flowing well, or they're plugged up, they can be plugged up with parasites, or just congested and not flowing well, then our stomach acid is going to decrease, so that we're not burning the intestines, because we don't have a way of neutralizing that so well. So then that's another reason why people will tend to have less stomach acid, because of that feedback loop with the gallbladder, or the bile flow, and then sometimes the pancreas, where the pancreatic juices aren't moving the way they should.
And again, parasites can plug all those areas up, right? Like flukes, things like that, pancreatic flukes.
Yeah, so there's the pancreatic flukes, but also there's the liver flukes that create quite a bit of problem. And then there's strongyloides, which can also plug them up. And Some studies show roundworms. So there's a variety of parasites that can block in some of the bile ducts and cause some sluggish liver flow. And I've experienced, as well as many of the people I work with, have experienced much better liver function and bile flow as they've detoxed and cleansed liver. And the detoxification pathways now, people will react much better. I had a medical doctor, she's retired and had been a practitioner for a lot of years, and she had bad eczema during her residency and the years before. And when she got to me, she was working with a doctor doing heavy metal detoxification. And every time she would do the quote, the brain phase she was working through using ALA and some other products, it would cause her to break out in a severe rash on her face. So she was listening to a podcast that I was on with this other doctor, and she thought parasites. She wasn't sure, just because of her training. She didn't get any training in parasites, so she was doubtful. But something told her, is like, okay, this could be the missing piece that I haven't addressed. So we went on a 6-month protocol with her. It was after 4 months, she could easily do that whole brain phase without having any reactions at all, because we had her liver moving and we were clearing out the parasites. And during that time period, she said she had identified five different parasites species just in her stool. And she became a believer in, that parasites do exist even in all of us in America. Just that it was contra to what her training was.
Yeah, and that's really something else. Whenever they kind of get shooken and they see the reality of that. I had a similar experience with a nurse practitioner. She brought her daughter into me, and this girl was young. And you even mentioned this earlier, the incline we've seen in Crohn's and digestive problems alone, 450% increase easily since the mid-90s. So we're seeing this in children. And I've got several school teachers that are patients and clients, and I talk to them and ask them, what's a full moon like? And they're like, oh, it's terrible. But this girl came in, she had Crohn's, or just, I would call it intestinal inflammation. And we start and test her out, and I said, this is definitely a parasite problem. We did some blood work, looked at some immune factors involved with that. We took some simple enzymes that can dissolve the shells away. We started seeing these things come out of the stool. And I'll never forget to look this nurse practitioner who had a daughter that had Crohn's, supposedly uncurable. They were thinking about, doing some intestinal removal and all that. Now the girl's intestines are fine. I'll never forget whenever she did a follow-up appointment, the girl came up and her stomach pain was gone. All her movements were solid. And the nurse woman's just kind of staring, like, as I kind of walked by, like, how did you do this? And I had to tell her, well, we look for things why the body's not healing. We don't want to blame the body. If your body has a stealth infection that gets missed by doctors and it's constantly fighting that stealth infection, is it doing something wrong? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we got to learn to trust our bodies instead of just thinking it needs, a chemical treatment, or even worse, maybe a surgical removal of an organ. And
I think it's better just to suppress the immune system so it doesn't fight the infection, making it worse, but hiding and masking the problems.
Yeah, and can we do that with expensive drugs, maybe like $3,000 a month? How'd that?
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Sounds like we have a win-win situation, right?
But it really happens all the time. And autoimmunity, is one of those things where it's like, okay, they're not looking deep enough. Why are they having those issues? You got to go to the why. And I talk to people all the time in functional medicine is, why are you so fatigued? And, why is your thyroid not working? Oh, I have adrenal fatigue, or I have leaky gut. I'm like, that's not the answer. That's just one reason. That's not deep. Why do you have leaky gut? Why do you have adrenal fatigue? You got to keep going to the deeper answer. And it goes back to those stealth infections, those hidden infections, and the toxins that are creating so much of the inhibition or problems within the mitochondria. And, that's where, you remember, back in our day, right? Back at school, the mitochondria is one of my favorite subjects.
Oh, yeah.
So teaching biochemistry in school, it was just so much fun. And I love, we're creating our, the new product is launching this week for our mitochondrial repair and restore. It's going to be game breaking and helping people get their energy levels back up. and just get their bodies to repair. It's like, how do you want the liver to work better? Well, every liver cell has about 2,000 mitochondria. And if you're toxic and only have about 1,500, you're just not going to do what it needs to do. So we need to get that mitochondrial function up so that we can, and then push the infections down so that we don't have continuous chronic infection. Where if we're always killing stuff off without bringing the energy up, it's just going to keep going up, and then we'll kill it back down, and then we'll go up again, and we'll kill it back down. So that's where, in our protocol, it's really important to open up drainage, support energy and vitality of the cells in the mitochondria and cell signaling. And it's vital for getting over these chronic illnesses and disease. And it's amazing how much people will do better by addressing not just, here's a vitamin for the pathway to support making a neurotransmitter, instead of saying, oh, here's a toxin or an infection that's causing the problem in the first place. Let's get rid of it. Let's get the cells fixed so your body can do everything on its own.
Yeah, very, very good. And I absolutely that was something new that I had never heard about, the inhibition of the GAD enzyme from parasites, but it totally makes sense. I was aware that parasite infections do affect neurotransmission production, but I also knew that our essential amino acids, our aromatic ringed amino acids, which are the precursors to our brain chemistry neurotransmitters, I knew they were already deficient. But getting rid of parasites in people in our practice, we see dramatic improvements in their mood, dramatic improvements in their quality, everything. So I knew that, again, gut-brain axis is so overlooked. And if there's a problem with the brain, it's definitely something going on with the gut. It doesn't start here; it starts there. So
there's a reason why 85% of our immune system is down there, because that's where a lot of stuff's going on. They say 80% or 85% of serotonin is made in the gut. So many things happen. It's our second brain, is our GI system. So we need to do all we can to support that and to remove what's creating the problem in the first place.
Yeah. So what do you think about high cortisol at night and grinding the teeth? Again, we talked about this briefly, but is the high cortisol and the grinding teeth, are they related?
I think so. I think the parasites drive the cortisol up and the teeth grind, and those symptoms will go down and sleep will become much better as you clear the parasites and bind the ammonia. So we use that biotoxin binder to bind that ammonia to clear it out, and it really helps people to deal with that, that symptom of insomnia, or just can't sleep well, or have rested sleep, which is a big problem for a lot of people.
Yeah. And if you're doing a adrenal, the saliva or urinary stress test, and you look at the cortisol, the melatonin flipped, so many times we see people on phosphatidylserine, which is actually pretty expensive if you get a good one. And the problem is, once you stop taking that, it goes right back to where it was. Getting rid of the parasites is a great way to remove that underlying issue that's elevating that cortisol. So anxiety, again, poor moods, all that, and having a good stomach acid. Now, another thing we haven't really touched on, but how important is stress management?
Really, to truly be healthy, one of the most important things is sleep. And so when it comes to stress and the management of stress, that highly affects our sleep. And not only that, but it also affects our health and our immune system, lowering it down to where we don't fight these infections so much. And so parasites can contribute to the stress on the body, and stress can also contribute towards a higher infection of parasites and other microbials. So they do go hand in hand, and it kind of has both ways. It's like they both affect each other on how they do there.
So if you had a potential client come to you, and before you did any kind of exam or maybe lab work or anything like that, and they just cannot seem to calm down, and if you say, okay, let's get off all stimulants, let's get off all toxic caffeine, no diet drinks, no energy drinks, none of that stuff, and they're still just wound up all the time, would you pretty high rate of parasites cause that in people where they just aren't able to even experience mindfulness?
I think so. I've had people that just hated life, or depressed or angry, didn't like being themselves, didn't like being a mother, didn't like being a spouse. And as we cleared the parasites, their life became much happier. And it's amazing the difference in change on their whole being as they cleared these critters out, right? And and emotions are tied to them too. I've had people pass parasites, it's just after they released emotions. So there's a high correlation with these emotions we hang on to. And sometimes we have to, before we can clear parasites, I have people that I refer to help clear out the emotions that are stuck in there. Because I've had people that I've worked with that have seen so many doctors and taken so many products, and they felt no change, and they're still super sick after 10, 20 years. And with them, the beginning, I have them go through sessions with a gal I refer to clear this misinformation, these anchored emotions that have really caused shifts and not allowed them to move forward in their health. And doing that and then starting them on a protocol, our success was much better than other ones that I've tried to do the protocols. Like, nothing's shifting. And we realize there's a lot of underlying emotional trauma that we have to really understand, and that's a part of it. And we have much more success as we release those emotional traumas while we're parasite cleansing.
Yeah, that's something that that I definitely see in practice. Kind of mentioned that before with, I had a lady that had an ovarian growth, and we did some I do a lot of emotional work with people. Being a best practitioner, we do a lot of level 3, but I also do a lot of breathing techniques, and I've got some pretty cool ways to go in there. I've used flower essences as well to kind of reset the nervous system to clear out, maybe past underlying traumas. And this was what happened with this woman. She had some forgiveness issues with her father. And the minute we cleared that, that evening, she passed a gigantic, looked like a black squid. So that was
Wow.
amazing to me to see those emotional traumas actually holding on to that. And I've seen some other things. Another lady the other day had chronic shoulder pain, and her hands are just all rheumatoid, like just huge rheumatoid. And when she first came into us, her hands, she had no grip strength. Picking up a pin, she couldn't even do. Now she's got a grip strength you would not believe. Her handshake is very, very firm. And she actually passed out something that she thought looked like a baby. It looked like a small little figure. And again, that was using your tools, and again, using some emotional stuff. And it's just mind-blowing to me how people can hold on to these things, and there can be something inside of them like that nobody knows until that emotion is cleared and you're using the right protocols. So
I agree. I love the flower essences. I use them quite a bit in my practice, and it's really helps people to move forward and just be able to let things go. I think part of healing is you got to realize is forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness of other people, and not hold on to that resentment. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it.
Yeah.
And we just need to really surrender to either a higher being and to your God, and whoever that may be, to just let that go and forgive. If we want forgiveness, then we need to be able to give that forgiveness to others. And what we realize is in these resentment, in these cases that people have done us wrong, they don't really care. They don't even know half the time they did us wrong. And we're the ones holding on to those feelings, and it's destroying us. And we have to let go of those feelings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just kind of winding this up a little bit, what are some of your happiest successful cases you've seen lately? Things that you just go home and you take and you share with your family, and you're like, oh, this was, like the mood changes in women. I think talking about the people that don't want to be a spouse anymore, that don't want to be a family person anymore, they're just depressed all the time. And you're able to clear these stealth infections out, and they're like, man, my life is great. I absolutely love everything. That's fantastic. Can you share with our listeners?
Love to.
Awesome.
So I have several stories. One is I had a 7-year-old girl. Her mom had a gal that she had met from Connecticut. They were in Florida. and she was having all this bladder pain. So they seen the pediatrician, they saw a GI doctor, they saw a urologist. All tests came back negative, and they told her just to drink more water. So 6-7 weeks gone by, they contacted me because they had no answer. And so I didn't know. I'm not an expert in urinary pain. That's not my area. But it's like, one thing I know how to do is muscle test. So I just trusted that, and it came up with a hookworm, Schistosoma mansoni. And, this is at the beginning when I started doing parasite stuff, so I didn't know too much about it. I researched it. And that hookworm, specifically, it's in warm water, and it can go and penetrate through the skin. Probably just penetrated through the ureter and up in. And so I asked her, like, look, did you guys go somewhere? Were you in water that might have had this? She's like, oh yeah, that same weekend that all this started happening, we were up in Ohio visiting on Labor Day. And water, if you know anything, that water in Kansas and Missouri and Ohio is nasty by Labor Day weekend. So I said, this is probably what it is. And so I referred her to another doctor who wrote a prescription for that parasite, being an acute issue, not a chronic issue. I thought that would be a better treatment, and it could really hit it out. It's what I tested as well. And so they visited with the doctor. The doctor wrote a prescription, and 3 days later, the pain was gone. And here it is. This little girl could have had chronic urinary pain and infections and all kinds of stuff for her life if we hadn't gone that. And that's been 3 years, almost 3.5 years now. I have a gentleman I'm working with right now. He's a horrible case of mold toxicity, schizophrenia, just all kinds of mental issues, and gut, and like severe gut. And when his gut goes bad, his head goes bad. There's a huge, that whole, connection. So SIBO, histamine reactions, mold, all this stuff. And like, look, we tested, we went through, and I said, your primary issue is parasites. So we've addressed a lot of these other issues because he's like, well, he wasn't quite ready because he's so sensitive to things. So eventually I'm like, look, man, if we got to move forward, I've been working with you 4 months. If we want to move forward, we need to address parasites. So we hit it hard last week with parasites. But he passed over 100 flukes. I mean, he's just pouring out. All of a sudden, his whole gut stuff went down. His digestion's improved. His brain's improved. His energy's improved. He's out walking without crashing. It's just really recent story that's pretty cool. I had another little girl that was, a little boy that had Lyme disease. Well, they didn't know, misdiagnosed. He just couldn't go to school. He's having 25 seizures plus a day. Missed first grade, second grade, and then started half of third grade. So the second half of third grade, he was able to attend school. Why? Because he took one product called the biotoxin binder, and that biotoxin binder stopped his seizures. And I mean, the note this mom wrote me was just completely tear-jerking because she couldn't order the product because we were out of it. This was a year ago. We were out of it. We were out of stock. She's like, is there anywhere I can get this? I want my son to finish school. He only has 3 or 4 weeks left. I need to find some. So on our Facebook page, we put it out there, and somebody had an extra bottle. They bought a bunch of bottles of it, and we shipped it over to her. And she was so grateful because the whole life had changed. And I've had the same story from several other kids that were having multiple seizures a day, that one product alone was the issue, or just really resolved it. Now, we're also working on the underlying cause to why that was happening. And then I've had people with chronic headaches for 10 years and fatigue and just felt horrible and depressed that now are living fulfilled, amazing lives. One of them is even working for me now. The very first one I put on, Mimosa pudica, she passed unbelievable things that came out of her. And every time, all her pain, all this shooting pain into her pelvis, shooting pain down her legs, all her back pain, all this pain went away, the migraines went away, and so much of it was a parasite issue. I had an 18-month-old that was covered head to toe with eczema, horrible. And during the full moon, which they didn't correlate the time period, but he would just scratch his face and bleeding. And so I said, look, let's go back to the patterns. When was the weeks because they kept the journal, that he had these severe reactions and was going, really, they said he was going crazy. And we looked at those dates, and they're all correlated with the full moon. So then we did 60 days of really hitting parasites, gut health, and just took 3 products and it cleared his eczema out. So, I mean, I got story after story. I mean, I had one gal that came down, and most of my patients are from out of state, but then she came down to see me because her mom lived here locally, as a patient of mine. She's 65. She had hives every day. She broke out in hives for a year. And she'd seen all these specialists, and nobody could figure out what was going on. So I went through and figured out, she had a tapeworm and some other stuff going on. And so I said, this is what I think it is. And we set her up with a couple products, and 10 days later, she passed a 6-foot tapeworm. Now it's been almost 4 years and she hasn't had hives. August will be 4 years. And so just that for her was extremely life-changing. And then, I got story after story that we could go through how our protocol with Cellcore Biosciences and Microbe has changed people's lives, that have done so many integrative medical therapies, that have done tons of nutrition, that have done a lot of medical things, and how going through and using these things and clearing parasites and infections and supporting mitochondrial function, opening up the drainage pathways, how they've been able to get to that next level and live their life in energy and vitality to where they definitely weren't living that way before.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'll tell you what, it's amazing as a practitioner to have your business built that way, because it's true authenticity.
Yes.
We have patients, all over the world. And I know you're the same way, just from word of mouth. I had a kid pretty early on in my career when I was really in avid contact reflex analysis. And I want to emphasize, I do both. So when a person comes in, I look for hot reflexes on their acupuncture system. Okay. And I can arm for that. And then as I'm fine tuning, as I'm working on the person, I use my hands. I get sticky sensations in my hands if I can tell if I'm on the right track or not. But I had this kid come to me, and he had a very similar story. He'd been to, I think, 6 neurologists, and a well-respected one in the Overland Park regional area had just diagnosed this kid with Tourette's, and he had extreme twitching and really bad behavioral changes. We cleaned out his gut. We put him on a parasite protocol. His mom was fully on board. She heard me lecturing at a I think it was either a podcast or me lecturing in a lecture hall or something, and said, you're making sense. I've never heard of anything like this, but this makes sense. And of course, the dad was kind of skeptical, and that's all right. Whenever I touched that reflex, his arm just yanked down, and he goes, what was that? And I said, that's what his body's fighting. Okay. We put him on some simple enzymes. This kid passes what looked like a cup of ramen noodles right in the toilet in front of all them. And she has been responsible for sending over 200 people to my office because of what happened to her kid. And he's a completely normal child now, no twitches. He interacts with Aria every time he's here. That's my little 5-year-old daughter in the office. And it's really, really gratifying. I mean, it's so satisfied to go home at the end of the day and know we're doing what we're supposed to do. And I'm sure that a large part of your practice, my practice is the same way, is built off of, getting people answers where they're just not finding them elsewhere.
Absolutely. It's great to be a part of something where we give people hope again, and we help them restore their real selves. What is it? We're here to live life to the fullest. We're here to live a maxed out life, and not a life of mediocrity or a life of illness and sickness. Or even if we have some of that, can we improve it to where we can feel like we lived an amazing and maxed out life, that we're contributing to the world, or we're accomplishing our mission we were sent here to Earth? Some people may have disease their whole life, but I feel like a lot of people can overcome what they do have, and that they can live life and be, make a contribution to this world and to others, and feel that purpose. And I think that is really important, is have that purpose in your heart in overcoming, chronic illness. And it's so great to see so many people's lives change. And that's why, I started a supplement company, was to get these products out to the world, because they actually work where so many other ones don't. And it's because of the research that goes behind them. And
the accuracy that's going on with that, the testing that's going on. And
exactly.
If you're putting love into these products, that has a major impact on it as well, because everything's a vibration or frequency in the world. And if we're putting those intentions into those things, then that they're gonna do some great work. So
Absolutely, I agree with you.
So one last question. I really appreciate you doing this again for us, and it looks like we've been able to stay on there live. The question is, what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they have concerns or questions? If they have a family member in need, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I have a website, and it's drtoddwatts.com, drtoddwatts.com, TODDWATTS. Also, totalbodywellnessclinic.com is our clinic site. We're updating that. There's a couple more doctors that should be on there, and I got to get that part taken care of. I don't spend as much time doing my technology as I probably should, but it's we can help answer questions. A great place to get educated is going there, and then there's probably a lot of YouTube or podcasts and summits that I've spoken on that are out and available, and I always highly recommend. There's some of them on my website, and then there's probably a lot more on YouTube.
Well, very good. This has been a real treat, a real pleasure. Dr. Todd Watts, my friend, thank you for taking time out of your day and giving our listeners some wisdom and some education, and hopefully some answers for people out there that are desperately looking for them.
If you can't find your answer, then you got to consider parasites being a problem.
Exactly right. And if you have a pulse, you have a parasite, right?
That's what I tell everybody.
Yeah. Well,
okay, great to see you. Really good to talk to you, and great to connect again.
Awesome. And we'll keep in touch, all right?
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.